Hello.
Hi.
Oh, so glad you're with us, Kim.
So good to
Yeah,
be here with both of
yeah,
you.
very much looking forward to our conversation. Yeah. So I'd like to introduce our special guest. Kim Stafford is Emeritus Professor at Lewis and Clark College in Oregon. He writes, teaches, and travels to raise the human spirit through poetry. In 1986, he founded the Northwest Writing Institute, and he has published a dozen books of poetry and prose, including The Muses Among Us, Eloquent Listening, and Other Pleasures of the Writer's Craft, and 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do, How My Brother Disappeared. His most recent book is the poetry collection As the Sky Begins to Change, and he's taught writing in dozens of schools and community centers, and in Scotland, Italy, Mexico, and Bhutan. In 2018, Kim was named Oregon's 9th Poet Laureate for a 2-year term, and Kim's father, William Stafford, was the U.S. Poet Laureate in 1970. In 1988, Kim's older brother, Brett, died by suicide at 40 years old. In 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do, How My Brother Disappeared, his memoir on his brother's life and death, Kim writes, painful acts like suicide and mysterious life dimensions like depression tend to call forth both indelible memories and a velvet cloak of silence. Yet, Shakespeare in the play Macbeth has Malcolm counseling and consoling Macduff on the horrific death of Macduff's wife and children with these words: give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers o'er fraught heart and bids it break. Kim goes on to say, give sorrow words. With words, stories spoken, the love in fact goes on. My brother kept silent his pain and broke. We must not do so. For there is one thing my brother's story teaches me. It is that the trick of life is harmonious relations, and the key to harmonious relations is talking bravely. So, welcome, Kim, to Talking Back to Suicide.
Yeah, talking bravely. My father used to say, let's talk recklessly, to not be cautious, not pause and, I better not say that. They wouldn't like that. What if I reveal that? And that habit of, not speaking one's sorrow is a killer. In my experience with my brother, that's what killed him. His silence, his inability uh, to tell us about his pain, his depression.
There's so much to Brett's life, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And also, of course, the intertwining of your life and his life. And I
yeah,
very much enjoyed is not the right word. Appreciated your memoir,
yeah,
right? The beauty of the language. Very often, I would find myself rereading the sentences over and
yeah,
over again. Um, and it seemed as if, or maybe the right word isn't seemed, you and your brother were kind of twins,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
love that image or that reality. Something about what at bedtime you were in separate
yeah,
beds, but you would like form a physical
yeah.
bridge with your body
When
across the
we were
bed.
kids,
You'd say that.
we were put to bed about 7 o'clock. The parents wanted some time to themselves, so it was still light, and we were in there, and we were told we could whisper and sing. We could talk to each other and sing little songs and so on. So we had all these rituals, and one of them was, the twin beds are about 3 feet apart, And one of us would put our hands on the floor and make a bridge with our feet on one bed and our head on the other. And then the other one would crawl across the bridge. And then we'd switch. So we had all these games and rituals. But then when we started getting sleepy, we had a little refrain we would say every night. Good night. God bless you. Have sweet dreams. See you tomorrow. And that little phrase became the structure of my book. That good night was the last year of my brother's life. That I'm filled with indelible memories of that year. God bless you. Well, that was our early childhood, this beautiful childhood we had. Have sweet dreams. That was as we went to college and we started to envision our life. And then the last phrase, see you tomorrow, in the book, that's the year after my brother's death, when the learning was so intense. The regrets, but also the memories and the celebration in my mind of who my brother had been that led to the writing of the book.
There was another quote from your book I wanted to read that it had to do with the purpose of a memoir, right?
Okay.
Telling one story, but to inspire other people's stories. Could you
Yeah.
say something about that?
Yeah, well, we might circle back to this, but one of the main things I wanted to put out there, Diane and Kino, is I prescribe writing as an antidote to killing silence and depression. And the writing of this book brought to me the recognition that why did my brother die and I did not? We had the same upbringing, we had the same pressures and mysteries and struggles, but I had writing. I had what Anne Frank had, her journal that she called her little friend, Kitty. She named her journal, and into that journal she could pour her sorrows, her epiphanies, her dreams, her identity. And I feel that writing, if you have a good friend, if you have a good therapist, if you have a good friend, a listening friend, someone who doesn't change the subject when it gets hard, that can save you. If you don't, writing can be the friend who never leaves you. The blank page will listen to everything you have to say. And I think that saved me. And I wanted to write the book so that idea might save others.
You mentioned about silence, right? That silence is a killer, and that silence contributed to killing your brother. Could
Yeah.
you speak more about his life and the suicide and your
Yeah.
thoughts on what were the many factors that were woven together?
Yeah. Well, it took me a whole book to answer that question, Diane.
I know.
But before I talk about the book, I want to quote two things my parents said that mystify me. Um, my father, after my brother Brett died, my father was not able to talk about it with us. He kind of went into hiding. He went into silence. He was this poet who'd published 60 books and, a man of many words who said, let's talk recklessly. But the pain of his son's death was so intense, he became silent. But when he traveled, he would talk to strangers about it. I found this after his death. This is the mystery of human behavior. But he has a poem about my brother, and there's a line in the poem that says, why tell what hurts? And I feel like I wrote the whole book talking back to that question. Well, you have to tell what hurts. The other thing I want to quote is, and this is not in the book, after the book came out, I gave a copy to my sisters and to my mother. And I went to see my mother, and she said two amazing things about the book. She said, part of my misfortune being related to a writer is that my faults become immortal. And I said, Mother, this is not a book about anyone's faults. I'm just trying to understand. But then she said, and I think this really speaks to your question, Diane. She said, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. But after reading your book, I think the over-examined life is not worth living. And I thought that's what killed my brother. Not you killed my brother, but that idea that if you have some darkness in you, don't overthink it, don't tell it, don't, turn away from it. Well, that is what killed my brother. So, he was, well, there's a scene in the book very early on. And this gets to the title of the book, 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do. My brother found an ad in the back of a comic book for a little pamphlet called 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do. So he ordered it. It was 25 cents or something back in the day. And it had all these sleight of hand card tricks, disappearing coin and so on. And being my brother, the older one, the perfectionist, the capable, he turned to the hardest trick, which was you put the wine glasses on the tablecloth, and then you grab the edge of the tablecloth and you jerk it away, and the wine glasses are left standing. Well, my brother waited till everybody was gone from the house. He was probably 10 years old or so. He got the best wine glass. If you're going to do it, you might as well really do it. So he got the best wine glass, which was this cut crystal from Finland that someone had given us, put it on the tablecloth, and then he jerked the cloth away. And of course, the wine glass shattered, and it was a terrible fiasco. Well, in that, to me, is his whole story. He wants to be capable. He wants to achieve. He wants mastery, but he has to experiment in hiding. And it results in failure, and he sees that as a judgment of himself. So, that was one of his silences. I'm going to do this in hiding. And there were many times that I tell in the book where he almost told me something, but not quite. And my foolishness was not to dig deeper, not to try to get that from him. Whatever his inner turmoil was, he wanted to spare me the suffering that he felt, so he kept it to himself. And that's a killer.
What you just shared made me think of shame, right?
Yeah.
The silence of shame, right?
Yeah. Yeah, where I think there's something Freud said late in life, addressing his own father in his mind. Father, you no longer need to punish me. I have learned to punish myself. And I think if we're not careful, we learn to punish ourselves, to hold ourselves to an impossible standard, and then see every faltering as a failure. There's a passage in the book called Resume of Failures.
Remember
That
that?
was,
Yes.
yeah, for one of my students, here I'm the big writing teacher and I have these plans for class, but one of my students raises his hand and says, uh, could we write a resume of our failures? And I said, well, how would that work? He said, well, your resume, it's all the bragging points. Like, you sort of did them for me, Diane. You said, oh, he was poet laureate. He's published these
Yeah.
books. You know what I mean? That's the resume. But my student said, in my experience, every item on your resume has an unspoken price, and so we made a resume where we had our resume points, and then in the right-hand column, what really happened. So I had PhD, and then over here, what was I thinking? I gave up 10 years of my youth to get this piece of paper, and then Kim Stafford, author of the book Having Everything Right. I couldn't even understand my brother's pain. How could I name a book? How, so you're trying to come to terms with the dark side of the bright side. And I've come to cherish this idea that if you acknowledge that right-hand column, you become self-aware and you become able to help others and to see the pain of others. You're not armored by your own sense of accomplishment or, preeminence.
And
I
then
don't know.
maybe a distance, distance from others. When I was
Yeah.
reading the resume of failures, I couldn't help, and I'm sure that's true for any reader, to think back on my own life.
Yeah.
And one experience that I had, which I don't know what was humbling and shocking a number of
Yeah.
years ago, maybe it was 2019. Well, I was Googling my name, which is
Oh,
maybe
yeah. Yeah.
embarrassing, but I
Uh-huh.
guess people do that.
Yeah.
And I'm one of them. So I'm Googling my name. And then I find out that I won an award. I won an award from my medical school, Downstate Medical Center. And the Alumni Association had given me the Dr. Frank L. Babbitt Award for Outstanding Achievement to the public and the medical profession.
Uh,
And I'm thinking, was there another Diane Kaufman in that year, of my graduating class?
yeah.
I'm like, how is this possible that I received this award and no one told me?
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
I ended up calling the medical school, and it was actually true,
Wow.
right? That I had been
Yeah.
given this award. And that's the backstory, right? Of, I don't
Yeah.
know, that hubris of sort of winning an award.
Yeah.
And then I think what I was feeling back then, the decimation of not even being notified
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the award.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
this is, yeah,
Which felt like a failure to me.
sure.
I felt like a failure.
And Kino, I'm wondering in South Africa, is there a conversation about how social media um, gets this idea across? You see a successful person, bragging about their accomplishments and so on, and then you compare it to your own life. Is that a topic
Yep,
in
that's
your
global.
community? Yeah,
That's
yeah,
global. Not
yeah,
even like in a community, amongst friends, amongst family, it's everywhere. We
yeah,
living in this, I want to compare all the time. Even
yeah,
if it's my neighbor, I want to
yeah,
compare.
yeah.
So if they succeeded or they bought a new BMW or a new Merc, then you feel
Yeah.
like, oh no, what's wrong with me?
What's
Clearly, I'm
wrong
doing
with
something
me?
wrong in my life.
Yeah,
I'm a failure.
yeah, yeah,
you know and then you get that pressure, especially with family, especially with siblings. That's also
yeah,
common,
yeah,
competition between siblings. And then if you say there's three or there's four, now you're competing with each other, and the one accomplishes more than the next because the next, he's going down a different route in life.
yeah,
He wants to do something completely different. He's not concerned about the materialistic world
yeah,
out there.
yeah,
Now you end up getting judged by your parents, and now you seen as a failure with your
yeah,
family because brother and sister has this, I don't.
yeah.
Does happen.
Yeah, I went to my many years ago now, my 10-year high school reunion. And in the parking lot where we were meeting, there was a really nice truck, beautiful, red, bright red, all fixed up, antique truck. And I thought, I wonder who that is. Well, it turned out it was the biggest failure in my high school class, Chuck, who the last time I saw him, he stole a car and pushed it off a cliff just for fun, and went to jail.
Sure.
But he had turned his life around, and the program was the MCs were the kids who had been popular in high school, and they were drunk and they had really nothing to say, and it was a charade. And at one point in the program, they said to the group, "Who's been married the longest?" And Chuck stood up, great dignity, beautiful man. And I just thought, who can judge? Who can judge one's worth, one's future, one's chances? And again, writing is a way to come back to yourself and by your own standards, um, assess what's important to you.
Can I just ask something about the writing part
Yeah.
before
Uh-huh.
Dan continues? So there's power in what we say,
Yeah.
okay, to the universe. There's power in what we write down. So if I'm depressed, what if I write down negative feelings? I hate the world.
Yeah.
I hate my
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
Now, am I manifesting more negativity or darkness to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
Yeah. Well, the poet Langston Hughes said, when I'm feeling bad, I write to keep from feeling worse. And I think one problem with writing is, many young people, puberty and competition in school and all that struggle, they write some poetry, dark poetry, depressed poetry, and they come to associate poetry with depression. So then they leave it behind. My theory about writing, this is what I tell my students: you only need two things to write. One is a sense of abundance, like I've got a lot to say. And then what I call the trick of beginning, here's how I'm going to start saying it. And the abundance can be abundant grief, can be abundant confusion. That's still well, there's a story about my father, the last year of his life. So he wrote every morning early. And he told me one morning, Kim, something happened in my writing that I've never experienced. I wrote a poem, and then I thought, well, how about writing another? So I wrote another, and then I wrote another, and I just felt great. And I said, well, Daddy, could I see those poems? They were so dark, Kino. They were so, one of them is about insomnia and self-accusations, and in those reaches of the night when some stabbed interval comes back, and tugs at your heart. And yet he felt exhilarated because he had brought it forth. So I recognize the difficulty of what you're saying. If I put these dark things down and they look back at me, is that like looking in the mirror and making it worse?
Yeah.
I think that's a danger, but there's a possible benefit. Need to push through. Let's have a writing class together and we'll explore that question. That sounds like a good one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at times also, I mean, like I also keep a journal. And then as I'm writing, a thought will come to mind. Should I really write this down?
Yeah.
Am I complaining? Am I complaining? I got so much
Yeah.
to be grateful for. Why am I complaining about this? Why am I
Yeah.
writing this down that I'm not happy with whatever?
Yeah.
Then I feel like, okay, I'm an ungrateful human. So then I
Ah.
don't write it down. So then I don't release it.
So
So I'm confused.
yeah, so self-censorship, is the worst kind, where you say, well, I'm not going to publish this. I'm not going to show it to anybody, including myself. I'm not even going to show it to myself. And that's a hard way. It's a little bit oblique, but what you're saying reminds me, I read about Bishop Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And you can correct me or augment my story, Kino, but what I read was they decided there are four kinds of truth. Looking back at apartheid and the struggles and all the violence and so on, there are four kinds of truth in assessing that story. And the first they called forensic truth. This is what happened. These are the facts. These are the photographs. These are the numbers. And then there is personal truth. So forensic truth, this is what happened. Personal truth, this is what happened to me. And then there's the third is community truth. This is what happened to us. So it starts with the facts, and then it goes to the personal experience, and then it goes to the collective experience, our community. This is what happened to us. And then the fourth kind, he called healing truth. and this is an account of what happened that is put together in such a way that it helps us become whole again. And I think of that fourth kind as my goal as a writer. So I start with the facts. This is the date today. This is where I am. This is the news in the world. This is where we are in history. And then personal, this is what I feel about it. This is my experience of all that. And then, well, this is what's happening to us. We are part of a big story. And then the fourth, if I can get there, is maybe an anthem, a song, a poem that helps people feel stronger, helps people feel kinder. And I don't always get to that, but that's my goal. So, the what you're talking about, the forensic truth. Oh, I'm a failure. I tried to do this thing. It didn't work. I feel bad. Well, yeah, that's a first step. And if you can't get past that, that's hard. But and this is what I feel about, this is what I remember, this is what I've dreamed, and then here we are in this story together. So you're sort of coming out of yourself into the community.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's given me confidence to write those
Yeah.
feelings down now.
Yeah. So I have just a trick. I write something and then I ask myself, well, what's part two? Part two. Oh, well, okay. Well, there's also this, so you have this knot of suffering and despondency. Okay, what's part two? Well, I've had this before and it didn't last forever. And wow, there are people around me who are suffering more than me. And, you start to work your way outward. I don't know if I have this in the book. I'm sort of is it okay if I babble a little bit?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I learned this thing about writing from a wise teacher. He said you write an account of something you remember, something that's happened to you, and then Diane, this is like a form of self-therapy. Then you ask yourself, okay, that happened. So what? So what? Well, and then you write an answer to that. So what? So I'm feeling really bad. So what? Well, here's what else is happening today. And then you read that second thing you've written and you say, well, so what? And you just keep writing and asking, so what? And so one example in the book is when I was maybe 8 years old, I went to my favorite place in the world. It was a fish farm. And there were these giant, beautiful fish. They're called rainbow trout, and they have all these beautiful rainbow colors. And there was a sign there that said, "Do not touch the fish." And I thought, well, I'll just touch one. They're so beautiful. And so I reached down through the water, and just as my hand touched the back of this big, beautiful fish, bang, the game warden caught me. And he pulled me upright and he said, don't ever come here again. So this is the memory. This is the dark memory. Like, this is depressing, right? Oh my gosh, I got busted. And so I asked myself, so what? Well, so just when I did what I wanted, I got punished. So I'm already in more interesting territory than pure suffering. Oh, you got punished when you did what you wanted? So what? Well, I learned not to do what I wanted, so I wouldn't get punished. Okay, now, maybe that's $100 worth of therapy already. That, well, what does that do to your life? If you self-censor, as you were saying, Kino, well, I better not do that because I'll get in trouble. And, a certain amount of that is okay. That's how laws work, and that's how good behavior works. But finally, no, I couldn't do that because it wouldn't work. That dream, I better not pursue that dream. It wouldn't work. I better not take the big cookie when it's passed around, the plate is passed around, or I'll get, the resentment of others. And a friend of mine said, Kim, take the big cookie and see if people still love you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I'm trying to. We're doing a little writing class here, Kino. So you might try that. Write something really depressing, and then ask yourself, "So what?" And write an answer to that, and then ask, "So what?" again. Just see where it goes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for the lesson.
yeah, yeah. So I was just at a military memorial on an Indian reservation here in Oregon, and they had, a statue of a soldier with his hands upraised, and it was a very heroic scene and so on. And then there were these plaques for the different wars, and it said Vietnam, and then it said Korea, and then it said Iraq, and then it said Afghanistan, and then it said World War II, and under it said victory. I thought, well, what about those other four? That is a
Yeah.
resume of failures for my country. That's a resume of stupidities for my country. So this thing we're exploring about the individual life, it connects directly to the culture of a nation that can't face its own dark truth.
Possibly a whole world that can't face
Oh,
its
yeah,
dark
yeah,
truth,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
But
Yeah.
one thing someone said to me after the book was published, or maybe it's in the book, I can't remember anymore. Someone said, Kim, we're surrounded by people committing suicide a little at a time by not doing what they want to do, by telling themselves, no, that won't work. I can't do that. I'm not skilled enough to do that. Other people do that better. That is a form of gradual suffocation and constriction, a form of suicide in life. And I feel like after I lost my brother, it's as if my eyes were open to the suffering of the world. I could walk down the street and see on someone's face, that person is saying no to themselves. That person is in pain. That person is suffering. And I hadn't seen that before. But my brother's death opened my eyes to that.
Tim,
So much.
why do you think um, that isn't shared enough? Or we, the quote observer, right,
Yeah.
don't ask, are you okay? Or you
Yeah.
seem like something maybe is not okay. Do you want to talk about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Like a
Yes.
conspiracy of silence.
Yeah. Well, in my brother's case, I think one thing he taught me was love can be a form of censorship. If you love someone, you don't want to darken their life with your darkness. You want to keep it to yourself. When we were little kids, if we got if we were misbehaving or we were shouting or we were, out of line, our mother would say, "Why don't you go out in the garage and think about it for a while?" And, the garage was where the spiders were, and it was cold and it was dark. And so you'd sit on a step there and think about it. And the idea was, once you feel okay again, you can come back inside and be with us because we're here to be happy. So if you had confusion, you were exiled from the family circle. And that's an extreme example of, I think, what we do to ourselves. Well, I don't want to bring that up. That would be awkward. That would be, that would cause the conversation to stop. The reason I wrote this book, or the impetus for writing this book, was for 20 years, you couldn't say my brother's name in my family. If you said even his name, everyone would start crying. And so after 20 years, I thought, well, I really miss my brother. I want to talk about my brother. So I was having breakfast with my sisters and we were laughing and, having a wonderful time. And I thought, well, this is probably a good time to ask. So I said, "Hey, how would you guys feel about me writing a book about our brother Brett? They burst into tears. They could hardly breathe. They just were sobbing. And I thought, that's not okay. That's not how I want to live. I want my brother back. I have to write this book. Uh, so I can't remember what your question was, Diane. I sort of go off into story.
About the conspiracy of silence.
Yeah. Well, it's a well-meaning conspiracy. You know, let's be happy. Let's stay on the bright side. But it's ultimately um, a condemnation of the truth and of being seen, being heard, being visible, being alive. You know, alive to your truth.
Want so much for things to be okay
Yeah.
that we don't want to recognize when
Yeah.
they're not okay. I'm thinking, if I recall correctly, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, that Brett's wife had known of other suicide attempts
Yeah.
that he had made, but had not shared that with you or other members of the family. And you only learned that, I think, after he had died.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. When I called and told her that Brett had died, the first thing she said was, "Oh, yeah, he tried that before, but he muffed it." You know, even judging his failure in this attempt. And to me, that's an extreme example of a conspiracy of silence that, you know, this is shameful. This is embarrassing. You know, I don't want to trouble you. I don't want to tell you. So very mysterious to me. And more recently, I learned from her that several weeks before his suicide, they were at the airport and he tried to climb up the baggage ramp into the plane to get away. And she didn't tell anyone. I mean, he was spiraling down into insanity. He was desperate. And I mean, that catches my heart to think, my poor brother. Not only was he in such despair, but he was with family who, instead of reaching out to help him, were shamed by him into silence. So that's a killing silence.
He was prescribed medication. He was on antidepressants at that time. And did you feel, or did others think, that there were some negative side effects from the medicine?
Yeah, I never got the details, Diane, but as I understand it, he was living in a remote town up in Canada where a counselor prescribing therapist only came through every couple of weeks. Excuse me. And so he was prescribed antidepressant, and he was not to combine it with alcohol. And the day of his suicide, he had a beer. We don't know if that tipped him over the edge or what it was, but he wasn't sleeping, you know. So it was a cascading series of effects that made things worse and worse.
I recall from the book that he had gone on some job interviews,
Yeah.
but was nearly, I'll put this in quotation marks, catatonic. He was severely not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he was paralyzed by his depression. Yeah, I was trying to help him get a job, and we were typing up his resume. You know, I was typing, he was telling me, and I said, "Okay, College of Grinnell, Iowa." He said, "Don't tell that part." Well, why not? Well, just don't tell that part. And see, before his death, Diane, I didn't ask. Well, why not? What is that about? It wasn't until after he died and I went to that college in Iowa and I learned that there were severe hazing rituals there where, you know, freshman students were taken out into the cornfields in winter at night and stripped naked and left. And this was done to my brother. And so don't tell that part. which is back to, I think, our primary question here. Tell that part, tell that darkness, share it, get help. Don't be alone with an increasingly impossible existence. Yeah, so he had this job interview, and they said, we really wanted to, I talked to them later, we really wanted to hire your brother. We all liked him. He was well qualified, but we just couldn't get an answer from him. He just was silent. And so what happened was then he went to my sister's house, and again, he was catatonic. My sister was away, her boyfriend was there, and the boyfriend was trying to get Brett talking, and was saying, "Oh, we did this, we did that. How are you?" And my brother was just silent through all this until the boyfriend said, "Oh yeah, we went duck hunting the other day." And at that point, my brother kind of woke up and said, "Do you ever hunt with a pistol?" And the boyfriend said, "Oh, we have a pistol, but I'd never hunt with a pistol." So then the boyfriend left, and my brother went all through the house looking for that gun. So, he was in a deep, dark well of sorrow. And after I gave a copy of the book to his daughter, my niece, she read it and she said, "Uncle Kim, you are too hard on yourself. My dad was on a path. You could not have stopped him." Now, I don't know if that's true, but that was a very kind thing to say.
Heartbreakingly tragic.
Yeah.
that your
But
brother's
here's the thing. In the process of writing the book, I realized, wait a minute. The day of my brother's death was one day
death.
in a
Mhm.
life of 40 years. It seems like the big thing. It's like this iron door blocking off the beauty of memory. And I said, actually, that is a small thing compared to the magnitude of his beautiful life. I want to tell that beautiful life.
And by talking about the life, you're helping other lives as well.
Yeah. This is the
You know?
thing, when the book came out, as I say, I got mixed reviews from my family, but many people wrote to me and said, "I've given your book to my 3 sons. I've called my brother for the first time in 20 years. We can finally talk about our uncle that we never
Yeah.
could." So many people have thanked me for writing this difficult book.
Yeah. 100%. I can see that happening. It's an organic story. It truly happened. It affected you, it affected your family, but it's opened up so many eyes out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just by talking to you, like I can probably sit here and listen to you for another hour.
Let's
How
do
you
it.
explain it, there's so much like
Yeah.
this positive and like mixture of a little bit negative emotion involved in how
Yeah.
tell your story. Just by listening to you now, it's also like opened my eyes up,
Yeah.
about how to write going forward.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. There's so many. I'll just say one thing about the writing. I started with the recognition, I can't explain this. I can't understand this. This is going to be a mystery my whole life. But I remember this one time. Oh, and then I remember this other time. I can tell the little stories. So just one example. When I was in second grade, the indelible memories. I was in second grade, was out on the playground, and my brother called me over to the hiding place. There was a hedge along the side of the schoolyard, and there was a hiding place inside. And he called me in there and he said, "I thought of another name they could call me." I said, well what? Hair Barrett. They could call me, his name was Brett. And he'd been taunted. "Oh, is your name Brat? Are you a brat?" The way kids can be so cruel. He said, "I thought of another name they could call me, Hair Barrett." And I said, no one's going to call you that. But in his mind, he was manufacturing these reasons to feel bad about himself. I mean, and then I see he was on a path. And so finally at 40, he performed what has been described as a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I'm going to take care of this by taking my life instead
But
of
you know,
there's something beyond this.
but like what you just said, like when someone is getting bullied at school,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in order for me to fit in, let me also mock myself as well, because that's going to make them laugh at me, and I'm
Ah.
going to laugh at myself as well because I came up with
Ah,
that name, and it feels like, okay, now I'm fitting in.
yeah.
That
Ah,
truly does happen. I saw that
yeah.
happening in school. If you were the one getting bullied all the time, okay, how can I make them like me? So the only
Yeah.
way I'm going to make them like me is by insulting myself as well in front of them. And
Ah, yeah, I'll
boom,
get ahead of
you
them.
think
Yeah.
like, yeah. So now you
Yeah.
got some sort of acceptance, but it's not the acceptance you should be
Yeah.
having.
Yeah, so Kino, you're
So you
taking
just
me back.
accept
I
it.
should have said, yeah, why don't you say that first before anyone else does?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
As
sad.
as long as you see the I don't know, double entendre of it, right? That you're
Yeah.
not believing the
Yeah.
put down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in that
Well,
sense, it's humorous. Look, I can make fun of myself because it's not true.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a hair barrette, and I'm
That's
not a
right.
brat. I'm
Yeah.
Brett.
Yeah, I'm
Okay?
Brett. Yeah. Well, I grew up with being taunted. Kiam, that's a girl's name. On the playground. That was the refrain around me. And I just had to, yeah, I guess so. But then when I was 38, I read the book I'm named after, which is Rudyard Kipling's book, Kim. Uh, but 38 years, I thought, wow, I've got a girl's name. What does that mean?
but I mean, who said it's a girl's name?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
who said it's a girl's name? Who are we to judge? Do we know the history of the name? Have
yeah,
we looked up the history of the name? Who said it's a girl's name?
yeah,
Society just labeled it a girl's name because most females are called Kim, but doesn't
yeah,
necessarily mean that you can't name a male Kim.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
remember also once when I was in primary school, there was, one of my, what do we call them? Not colleague, but school
classmate.
classmates. Here we go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Classmates. One
yeah.
of my classmates. His name was Megan. Like
Ah,
Megan.
yeah,
So I'm not sure in the States, but like in South Africa, no, if you call someone Megan, it's mostly a female name.
yeah,
But nobody like really mocked him about the name because
uh,
it's still it's a name. Who are we?
yeah, 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 yeah.
You
Uh-huh.
know? I think it's immature, very immature.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
we
I'm,
can
Yeah.
see that now.
I'm recalling, was it Lewis Carroll in Alice in Wonderland with Humpty Dumpty says something about like the word is what you make it to mean.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, like reclaiming the power of your words and the power of your imagination.
Yeah. Well, one of the earliest poems I remember was what we said on the playground: sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That little rhyme to console yourself, to strengthen yourself. Oh, yeah, well, words will never hurt me. But of course they do. But still, you can talk back to them.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to take a sharp turn
Yes.
and ask you, Kim, about the poet Sylvia Plath.
Yeah.
So Sylvia Plath, very, very talented woman,
Yes.
right? And also had psychiatric illness when she was a young woman, right? And
Yes.
ultimately died by suicide and
Yes.
leaving behind 2 young children,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And she was voracious in her writing and her
Yes.
poetry and her dark side, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about what, I don't know, needed to be done in addition to her writing for her to have been able to save herself?
Yeah. Well, she was married to a big ego, who probably was threatened by her talent and made life hard for her. There is a passage in the book where, a week I had on my calendar that I was to give a talk about Sylvia Plath. And then my brother died by suicide, and a week later I was supposed to do this program. So I called the organizer and said, I can't. I'm just too broken up. I can't do it. And she said, well, the show must go on, So there I was at the podium talking about Sylvia Plath. And one thing I said was, Plath did half a good thing. She told us about deep darkness and depression, and she revealed in eloquent terms what it's like to be in that dark place. The other half is to go beyond that somehow, to say part two, to say also, to say community truth. And she wasn't able to get there. And many
Have
people are not able.
to have your resurrection when you're still alive.
Yeah, that's right. My father once said, he was quoting, I think Erik Erikson, it might have been. He said, toward the end of your life, you look back at what you've done, or probably at any point in your life, and you say either, that's my life, that's my story, that's what I did, that's what I didn't do, that's my story. And my father said, the other option is you look back and you say, that's not how it was supposed to be. If only I would have done this instead. If only they had let me do this. If only I had done this other thing. And my father said, if you can achieve the first, that is my story, you can be happy. You can help other people. You can be generous. You can have Ubuntu. If it's the second, you are doomed. So how do you get from a sense of, no, that's not my story, to, well, that's my story? And I think by writing, that is my story. That's what I did. That's who I encountered. That's my turning point. That's what I lost. That's what I gained. You're either by writing or talking in therapy or talking to a friend, meditating, a lot of ways to achieve this, a sense of reframing what seemed like a failure and a darkness into, that is my possession. That is my story. That's who I am. That's my destiny. And you achieve a kind of independence and ownership.
In our state of Oregon, suicide is, well, according to 2021 or 22 statistics, it's our 10th leading cause of death. But I recently, having gone to an advocacy event from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, that 2023 data has it as our 8th leading cause of death.
Oh, dear.
And it's the second leading cause of death, right? From somewhere around 10 years old to 34 years old. And suicide is, in the United States, the 11th leading cause of death. And it's the second leading cause of death for youth. So in listening to you, I can tell you my eyes were getting teary because I was thinking, you have a teenager, a 20-year-old, a 25 or 30-year-old saying, my story is over.
Yeah.
Right? And what are your thoughts? I mean, there's a crisis going on in people taking their lives.
Well, I think Kino touched on it. Social media, you were surrounded by stories of celebrity and success and wealth and being a star. And then you look at your own life and it doesn't look the same. So it's easy to judge. Do I have the statistic correct, Diane, that as many or close to as many Vietnam veterans have died by suicide as died on the battlefield? Is that?
It could be correct. I remember in this goes back a couple of years ago, but in 2019, there was a New York Times article that the title of it was more like there had been more suicides than people dying on the battlefield for the military.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we have, as a nation, as individuals, as a society, we've entered into a bargain where we assess success in very narrow ways: victory, wealth, power, rather than kinship, connection, relationship as the great treasure, the family of the human project. I think I write every day to try to talk back to that, to try to honor the richness of daily experience, the beauty of the earth, the myriad kindnesses that I'm surrounded by. As Kino and I were talking earlier, you read the news and it seems like humans are pretty bad. But when I look around me, I'm surrounded by people who are kind and friendly and open.
Mm.
So I have to make up my own mind about what's true.
I mean, 10 years old,
Yeah.
Diana said 10 years old, from 10 years old. Okay, I'm a millennial, right? When I was 10
Yeah.
years old, there wasn't smartphones as well.
Yeah.
There was no reason I could ever think of for anyone at that age when I was growing up to commit suicide. But now a 10-year-old is given a smartphone. It wasn't TikTok when either of us were,
Yeah.
at that age. Now you give a smartphone to a 10-year-old. I'm scrolling. I'm seeing how Kylie Jenner is living her life. I'm looking at all these young celebrities in Hollywood, lavish lifestyles.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh no, why am I not, living a lifestyle? So that's what we put down, at that age group, between 10 to 18, why they are committing suicide is because of comparison,
Yeah.
And the
So
relationship becomes with the cell phone. So I'm so struck when either I'm taking a walk or I'm driving the car and seeing people around me. The person they're about to cross the street in front of me, right? They are looking at their cell phone as they're crossing the street. A person who's delivering food on their bicycle. I've seen people reading their cell phone as they're riding the bicycle. People at dinner tables. I'm walking, I see them outside having their dinner. They're on their cell phones and they're not engaged with each other.
Yeah. What makes it
That's
worse
common.
is your mother.
I think that is more so the reality than the opposite now.
Yeah. Kino, what were you saying?
Yeah.
I was saying that, parents are no different. Okay. I'm giving my 10-year-old a cell phone and I'm also on my phone at the same time. I'm like, hey, check this out. And then my daughter's like, hey, but no, check this out.
We have work
causing
to
so
do.
much harm. So much
right.
harm.
Yeah.
Texting each other in the same home.
Yeah.
If you're in different rooms, sending a text
You're not
message.
having a conversation at the dinner table anymore. How was your day at school? How was your day at work? It's like,
Okay, how about if the three of us make a vow to have a cell phone fast sometime soon? An hour, half a day, and see what happens. See what we gain.
I actually monitor myself weekly. So on a Sunday, I'll get a report of how long was I on my phone. So I restrict myself. If I'm going on my phone, it's because I'm posting a clip, from the podcast. It has to be related to my own personal growth. Bringing more awareness to my brand, to the shows, but not, I'm learning. So what I do for myself is I adjust the algorithm. You need to learn how to adjust the algorithm. So I'm going to go onto my search and I'm going to search for videos that are going to benefit me. It's going to educate me. So when I go onto Facebook, I know that's the first thing I'm seeing. I'm not seeing Kylie Jenner in a Porsche or Lamborghini or whatever she's driving. I'm not seeing that first. I'm seeing educational content that is benefiting me. So that's what people need to do as well. You need to control that.
That's good.
Yeah.
I remember I remember, Kim, in the memoir you mentioned, I think it was about almost like riding the wave, that life has its highs and
Yeah.
its lows, and then from the
Yeah.
low it goes up again.
Yeah.
And the idea too that one story is not necessarily over, right? Or the learning that one can take from the experience can change the next part of
Yeah.
one's story.
Well,
How do you think we can cultivate that?
Well, that's an idea from the writer James Hillman, who says, if you have what he calls story consciousness, you learn as a child that the story of a character and your own life, things get better for a while, and then there's a turning, and things get worse, but then there's a turning, and things get better. There's this ongoing wave, and that is the story of one's life. There's success, and then there's struggle, and there's epiphany, and then there's trauma. And if you have story consciousness, Hillman says, when you're on your way up, well, this won't last forever. I'm going to enjoy this, but it won't last forever. And when you're on your way down, again, you think, this is bad, but it won't last forever. There's something beyond this. If you don't have that, when you're on your way up, you think, I've made it. I'm a success. This is my story. This is who I am now. And then when there's a turning, wait a minute, what happened? You're on your way down and you think, okay, I'm an utter failure. There's no reprieve. There's nothing else. And then you don't know that there's a turning. So to write, to look at the world, to study the patterns of one's own life and others, and to see there is this wave pattern. And I won't get over excited about the peak, and I won't get over depressed about the trough.
Thank you so much, Kim, for being
Thank you
our
both.
guest today. Are there any penultimate words that you would like to say?
Also share where we can find you online to
Yeah.
get coaching
Well,
on writing or what you're doing in that space.
I have on Instagram, I post a new poem every day. This is my ritual. So I write a poem, I revise it, I post it with a photograph, and that's on Instagram, Kim Stafford Poetry. And then I have a website, kimstaffordpoet.com. And there I have little films, songs, poems, little essays, all kinds of things, books. I think I would end just by saying about a year after my brother died, I was looking for a house to live in. My life had fallen apart and I needed to live alone. And I thought, how do I deserve to live in a house when my brother isn't even in the world? And so I went up before dawn to the mountain where we scattered his ashes. And I sat by the cairn that we had made, this pile of stones. And I just sat in the darkness, and across the canyon, I saw this flashing light in the glimmering in the darkness. And out of this light, this sounds very mystical, but it's true. Out of this light came my brother's voice. And it said, it doesn't matter where you live. It matters that you live. You are to live. And I saw this was a bird called a gray jay. And as its wings flared, there would be a light. And then its wings would flare again. And so that's what I say to myself and others. It matters that you live. It matters how you live. That's our work.
Be present.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honor that life that you are embodying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you already posted your poem for today?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Want to share it quickly?
Sure. Well,
If you have
this,
it.
okay, this is actually kind of pertinent.
I'm going to follow you. I'm following you right now.
Okay. Because, I read the news and it's so dark, but I take something from the news often and make it into a poem. So today I read that there's an element called samarium. It's a rare earth, and it's only mined in China. And so with the trade barriers, China's not exporting it to the US anymore. And this is a big problem because this is an essential element to make a magnet to put in the nose of a missile. And we've sent so many missiles to Gaza and Ukraine that we're running out of missiles. So we don't have this element. So this is a big crisis. So I thought in my mind, rare earth. I mean, that's such a beautiful phrase, rare earth. And then the missile. So I wrote this poem, Rare Earth Samarium. They dig it up in China, refine it, combine it with cobalt to make magnets that fit the nose of missiles to kill multitudes in war. You can heat it by the friction of flight and it will not lose its tug. But now we're on the outs with China, trade restricted, so many missiles spent in Gaza and Ukraine. Our weapon stocks are now depleted. Earth, rare earth, what can we do?
Nice. I just
So,
saw there also.
yeah,
Okay,
okay.
can't see it on the screen, but I can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, more where that came from. What a pleasure to speak with both of you. Kino, thanks for staying up late. And Diane, thanks for starting early.
No, thank you. Thank
Okay.
you so much. This was
Okay.
great.
Be
Right.
well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.